Safety precautions while operating. First one, safety glasses. The board has to be a size to fit through the machine carefully. If I send a really short board through, like if I try to send something like this, what's going to happen is it's going to get to this point and then it's going to kick forward. And I'm going to end up killing my board instead of straightening it. So your board has to be the right size. And for this machine, your board needs to be 8 inches long. Your board needs to be 8 inches long. Next thing is your board needs to be at least 3/8 thick. If your board is too thin, if I had too thin of a board, so your board needs to be 3/8 thick, what would happen if my board was really thin, the one that I sent through there? Well, it would cut this part just fine, but what would happen when it got down over here?
I'd cut that.
Exactly, it cut the heel off my push stick. So, I need to make sure that it's at least 3/8 thick, otherwise I'm going to kill my push stick. The other thing, if it's too thin, it's going to bend and flop around and it might be sticking up here. Next thing, I need to distribute my weight evenly. Next safety precaution while operating, distribute your weight evenly. Can't tell you how many times I've seen this happen where a student will go over and they'll do this little dance move when they're sending it through. They'll get it to this point and it's like one of their first few times using the machine, and so they'll be over here doing this little thing right here as they inch along, and they kind of do the little. So what's going to happen to your board when you send it through like that? Yeah, you're going to cut the whole back side and you're barely going to touch the front side because there's no weight on it. So when I send this through, I'm going to be distributing my weight so that it goes all the way across evenly. If you send a board through 20 times, it will be different. It's not going to be true the whole time because your weight, even a little bit, is going to cut more on one side than another. It's going to be straight, but you're going to be cutting more on one side than the other. So the next thing is no end grain. No end grain. If I was to take this board right here and send it through, the grain is going straight down, and what's going to happen is it's going to cut all the first part okay. It's going to chip it a little bit, but when it gets to this last part, it says, I'm hungry, and it's going to grab onto it, and usually it ends up ripping the last like half inch out and just tears it and throws it across the machine. Sends it on down the path over there. So if you send end grain through, if the blade's really sharp, sometimes you can get away with it, or if you go really slow, but usually it's going to tear it out right there. So your grain, next thing write down, grain must be parallel to the table. The wood grain is parallel to the table when I send it through here. Also, I'm going to go with something a little bit in depth. If this doesn't make sense to you, that's all right. But if I send a board through here, the grain is actually important depending on if it goes uphill or downhill. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. If it matters to you, come and talk to me later. But if my grain is pointing uphill like this cutter, when it comes around, it's going to be cutting the same direction as that, and it's going to cut it off nice and smooth. So when I send my board through, if the grain is a little bit going uphill, my board, when it comes out the other side, it's going to be nice and smooth on the back side. But if I send a board through with grain that's pointing downhill, when it cuts, it's cutting through that grain, and it always leaves a little bit of a tuft of wood, like a little bit of a tear out, just a tiny bit sticking out. And when it comes out the other side, it's going to be a little bit rougher. And if that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. If you want something really smooth, come find me. We'll talk about it. Okay, a board like this, you see that? It's got a lot of wobble to it. This machine will take out wobble as long as you hold it to one side. What I always find is a student that pushes down when he goes through this way, or actually, how's it? He's pushing down here, and then when he comes out the other side, he starts pushing down here. Do you see how that changed it? It changed my plane as I went through. So if you have a board that's really wobbly, you need to hold it the same way the whole way through. If I get through halfway through cutting this and then I push down here, now I'm not cutting, and you will keep that wobble all the way through. It will never cut it flat. So you have to keep yourself holding it firm as you go through. I'm going to do a demonstration now on pushing it through, and unfortunately I'm going to do it wrong for you because I want to show you what I'm doing, so I'm going to step out the way as I push this through. I try to always get a push stick if I can. Sometimes I don't want a push stick. In a situation like this, I probably wouldn't use a push stick so I can feel it with my hands. My hands are going to be far enough away, it's going to be safe, but otherwise I'm always going to try and use a push stick. I can hold this part down right there, and I can push it through right that way and keep my fingers far away. I always want to keep my fingers, remember 4-inch rule, keep your fingers at least 4 inches away at all times. So on this one though, because it's got a wobble to it, I'm going to use the thumbs up rule. And the thumbs up rule is that my thumb goes on the back up here, and if my fingers are hanging down, what's that going to do?
Cut your fingers.
Yeah, it's going to go on the other side and kind of coat. So I do the thumbs up, which means I put my thumb there and my thumb here, and my fingers are up, and that way when I send it through, I know my fingers are safe and I can feel how the board is moving as it goes through. The reason I'm doing this board is that square at all?
No, sir.
It's not square at all, and so we're going to square this one up. The first thing we need to do is get a flat edge. So I don't care about the fence right now because it's not this has a huge wobble in it. However, what I can do is I can be smart about which one I start with. So I'm going to pick the corner that's closest to 90 to start with. So that looks like this one right here. So these two corners right here are 90 degrees, and I'm going to put a mark on there just so I remember that because it's easy to forget. I'm going to run it through this way, and first what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get that wobble out of it. Okay? So I'm going to turn the dust collection system on now. It's going to get loud, and the air handler unit is going to turn on. But you'll see when I push it through, I'm going to hold my weight to one side. And that's going to put a huge gap on the other side. But if I push it down here, then I get this huge gap on the back side. So I just have to make it work. If I want to, I could try and just do the middle to start with and just do that part. But then it's kind of dicey like that, so I don't want to do that to start with. Also, last thing I forgot to mention before we go through here, I always want to cut as little as possible. Write that down. Cut as little as possible. And I'll show you what that means. If I pull this all the way back to right here, I have 6 inches of blade exposed when I push this through. And that means I can catch, oh, forgot that one. So I can catch anything in there. So when I push this through, there's a lot more space of blade showing right here where I can have something dangle down into it. For you guys, those belts that hang out just a little bit, if it sucks that in, it might not stop right there. So make sure that the belt's tucked in tight. Loose hair, not loose hair, long hair, loose clothing, earbuds, drawstrings, that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this forward until all I'm cutting is just that piece right there. And now I can lock that one in. And now I don't have a lot of room for something else to get saved.